I grew up in this city, and in fact, my parents lived at the lakefront. Our home was within about 200, 300 feet of the levee. And as you might suspect, I've lived through and experienced a lot of hurricanes. And as these hurricanes would approach our city, we would run to the levee, and we would watch the surge roll in, the tide and the big waves, and they would splash, and it was really quite exciting. What's important for everyone to understand, I'm a child, I'm standing on that levee. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever believe that levee could fail. It's like walking into a building and getting into an elevator and the elevator crashes. It's like crossing a bridge and the bridge just falling out from under your feet. The last thing that we as Americans would remotely suspect is that the greatest engineering firm in the world, so named because they were able to build a Panama Canal when no one else could, the greatest engineering firm in the world caused the flooding of this city. Not Hurricane Katrina, the United States Army Corps of Engineers. How does it make me feel? Well, I say to myself, well, okay, number one, I've got the compensation part, right? Okay, you did me wrong, pay me. And they say, well, no, we're immune. Okay, fine. But then I say to myself, what about this conduct? How did this occur? And can this happen again? Can this happen in other parts of the country? The United States Army Corps of Engineers is a monolith. No, folks don't realize the millions and millions and millions of dollars that these guys have at their disposal to spend. They don't understand that this organization is responsible for the health and safety of millions of people. There are levees all over this country. Now think for a moment about whether or not that levee is actually going to do what it's intended to do. Think about the fact that the Corps tells us that they performed as designed when they fell down. Think about that outrage. Did you know that water that went over the top could make the levee fall down? No one knew that. So now what we have, instead of a Corps of Engineers that says we're going to make a better levee, you know what we have? We have a Corps who says we have built levees to reduce your risk. In other words, folks, you're all at risk for flooding, and all we're trying to do is reduce the risk. Well, that wasn't the bargain that I made, or at least I understood that they made, and that's what outrages me. Just give me the information, tell me what I'm dealing with, and I'll figure out what I got to do to protect myself. There's a group of people in this community, and we call them Creoles. They are African Americans. There was a group in the community, and they were tradesmen or craftsmen. They were your bricklayers, they were your sheetrockers, they were your ironmongers. And when I tell you that you see brickwork, you've never seen brickwork like brickwork done by a New Orleans Creole. When I was a kid, my father would say, come, you gotta see this, you gotta see this. And I go into a room and there's a guy putting plaster on the wall. I'm like, what are you showing me? He says, watch. And this guy would put the plaster on the wall, and the wall would come out smooth as glass. One of these gentlemen was a man named Andrew Reeves. He was an ironmonger. His son did unbelievable things with iron, you know, the curls and all this stuff. He's about 80 years old. He came to see me after the storm. He says, Joe, I lost my sister. I lost my business. I own my house, Joe. I own my house because they told me to pay it off. That's what you did when you worked your entire life. You paid off your house. And Joe, when I paid off my house, I didn't buy any flood insurance, because the only reason why I had flood insurance in the first place is because the bank made me do it to cover their mortgage, not to protect me. People bought flood insurance to protect the bank. He lost everything. And as he stood in this room and cried, I tried to figure out what I was supposed to say or what I was supposed to do. I felt like I should be doing something. I should say something. I couldn't think of anything to say. I'm not that smart. And the only thing I could think to do is what I do, which is to file a lawsuit, which is what we did. Well, obviously, we have to be mindful of the public fisc. We get that. We're mindful of the fact that the government has made some payments. But what's missing here is a fundamental lack of understanding of what happened here, okay? We get the fact that those people who had a home and didn't have flood insurance got a government grant. We haven't thought about the people who died. We haven't thought about the people who've been injured. We haven't thought about people who didn't have enough money to own a house but who rented. They got nothing. And if you want to be really, we could be a bleeding heart, but let's not be a bleeding heart. Let's talk about the folks who were in business, who had an ongoing active business and who lost their businesses. They're gone. What do we do about them? There is an uncompensated gap. Are we trying to rape the government? No. Are we trying to get money for nothing? No. No. What we're trying to do is to give these people back what they had. We're trying to restore their faith because, as I said to you, these people never for once imagined that they were not protected. Now, do I mean to say that the government is required to protect me from all catastrophe? No. What I mean to say is if you build a wall, and it's a wall that I paid for, it ought to stand up. That's all I'm saying. Can water go over the top? Yeah. Might there be flooding? Of course. We've been living with flooding for the last 250 years. The question is whether or not we've been living with catastrophic flooding that results from the failure of a wall, the existence of which is what gave us the courage and the confidence to build in the first instance. That's the problem. If I had the chance to talk to the president, the first thing is I would say is that I understand that we are not the entire country. We are a small segment of the country. We are a small, tiny, tiny piece of the 200 some odd million people who live here. We get that. What I would say to the president, I'd say, Mr. President, we have an agency here that is responsible not only for the safety of New Orleans, but is responsible for the safety of the entire community. So the first thing, Mr. President, you've got to do is you've got to make sure this agency is responsible to its people. You've got to look hard at how this agency does its business. You've got to totally rework it. They have to be responsible. You can't allow them to have a revolving door between the agency and their own subcontractors so that being an employee of the subcontractor becomes more important than the safety of the population. That's number one. And how do you do that, Mr. President? You do that by making them responsible, making them pay for their neglect. That's how you do it. And so by writing a check, you do two things. You compensate people for the uncompensated loss. And number two, you send the message. We're not going to tolerate business as usual. We're going to change the way. It's not about making individuals who work for the Corps rich. It's not about making their subcontractors rich. It's about a public entity, a public agency doing what it's supposed to do, which is protecting the people. I'm not good at evaluating who I am or what I am. All I can say is that I try very hard. I don't know how I'm regarded. I don't know, and I know that when I go to a cocktail party, I'm sneered at and I'm looked down upon because I represent the poor, and I'm necessarily associating with people who are means and who think that what I do is absurd. I recognize the fact that what I do has made me comfortable, so I get that part of it too. But what I've always been curious about is how those who are wealthy, those who are comfortable, don't understand the fundamental concept that their comfort is only there because everybody else is at least surviving. And that their comfort is in jeopardy if all the other folks out there, less fortunate than them, are not surviving. that's when their comfort is at risk. I mean, I've always seen it as a self-preservation concept for the rich. All right? We're not guaranteeing everybody that they will be rich, but we're guaranteeing everybody that they'll be safe and they'll have some degree of survivability in the face of what this world is that we live in. So to me, I think it's not strategic, it's not a good tactical view to just ignore people who have sustained damage, who have suffered, who don't have economic means. I think you've got to at least be mindful of, if you want to make it the most cynical way in the world, give them enough so that they don't cause you any difficulty. Now, for me, give them what they're due. Okay, I'm on the other side of this thing. And what they're due is at least to be where they were before you did them damage. Well, it's been one hell of a 6 or 7 years. You know, I will share with you that before Katrina, and when I would watch the news about Beirut, and even going back to watching the fighting in Ireland and the wars here and there, and I thought to myself, God, what must it be like to walk down a street, where the buildings are bombed out and there's nobody there? Well, I'm going to tell you something. What we lived through in Katrina wasn't a bombed out city or a destroyed city, but it's as close as I ever want to get. I drove through this city where there wasn't a soul, because I was fortunate enough, my house, I had the wherewithal to have a gas-fired generator. So my house had full electricity. I had air conditioning. So I was here, and I'm driving around. There's not a soul. There's trees down everywhere. The city is total darkness. You could drive on the wrong side of the street. You got the sense of the Lord of the Flies. You could do essentially whatever you wanted. There were groups of kids, running around before the guard came. I can recall driving down the street and seeing a red dot moving on my body. I actually experienced this. They thought it was funny, the National Guard. You saw who they were. It was the most bizarre experience that I could ever imagine. It's important to have experiences because it gives you a different view of the world. It changes you in a way that I can't even explain. Because before Katrina, I had a way of thinking and a way of believing that's not quite the same. And I don't even know that I can explain to you how I've changed. But it has changed my perspective. Being the richest is just not that important. Doing your best is. And I was taught as a child that the United States, as for an example, just as an example, that the United States Army Corps of Engineers was an example of everything good about this country because we were the best. And as I sit here today, I'm queasy because I have to ask myself, is my government the best? Is this country the best? Are these corporations, is the industry the best? Are our scientists the best? And I have to say, I'm not quite sure. And what we ought to be about is being the best at everything, the best at feeding our children, the best at educating our children, the best at science, the best at going to the moon. I thought that's what we were all about, not about being the best at making the most money. I have a problem with that.